If you have any feedback about topics that you think would be of interest, please just let us know. There's so many different things that we as parents interface with on a typical day, so we really want to kind of meet your interest level and your needs in different ways. A couple things. One, if you come to future sessions, and we hope you do, if you don't mind using the back parking lot, that would be great. As the school families come in, kind of the front parking lot gets rather congested, so if you just use the back parking lot, there's more space there. Second thing is that, does anybody else need a certificate? I've handed a few of these out, and I'll sign them at the end. And always, if there's any kind of needs that you have as far as documentation, we can kind of help out in that way. The next one that we have, just so you know, is on March 26th, and it's dealing with behavioral challenges. It's a friend and colleague of mine, Dr. Jamie Belo, who's a pediatric psychologist at St. Vincent's in the department that I was at prior to coming here. It's definitely, I've seen her present on this topic. It's really worth coming. And all of us, and I'll talk about my family here in a second, have issues with behaviors regularly. So I would just really encourage you to kind of consider coming there. If you know people who would benefit, please encourage them to come too. But I can't think of a topic that we deal with more and really want more help than that one. So March 26th there. So let us know if you have any questions. So to begin, before I start talking about sleep today, just some background on myself. I mentioned being a pediatric psychologist. I was at St. Vincent's Center for Children for 10 years until joining Easterseals as the vice president of the psychology department in June. And really excited about the opportunities here. There's a lot of expansion, a lot of growth, tremendous need in the world of pediatric psychology, and I really feel like Easterseals is set kind of to really meet that and be kind of a community leader overall. So we're excited about what this year beyond will hold. I'm also the father, married father. My wife, Amy, and I have 7 kids. And truth be told, there's one more on the way from really beyond, oh my gosh. So she's due at the beginning of August. So we have 7 kids from the ages of 12-year-old twins, 10, 9, 7, 5, let's say 22 months, and then one on the way. So as you can imagine, what we speak about is my life. So much of what I do is honestly trying to figure out myself what's the best way to go. So that's why I love this. I love this topic. I love these just topics in general because we're all in this discernment as parents. We're trying to figure out where the best place to go is, right? And manage this. So what I really want to do with the series here, and I think for everybody who speaks, is to make this, honestly, if you have a thought or question that comes up as I say something, just please interject. Let me know, because I want this to be useful. You know, it's 4:15 on a Tuesday afternoon, so we hope that it's actually enjoyable and useful for being here. So we begin, the lost art of sleep, right? What should I expect and why is it so important? So when we think about sleep, I just had to kind of reflect, let you read this comic here. It's a little bit as going to bed, thinking about it as a short break between the nighttime naughtiness and the morning, well, craziness at the Schroeder house, right? We all need that break. We really, really do. And for a lot of reasons that we'll talk more about. And without it, you know, I reflect on, we joke about in our house, there was the pre-kids and the post-kids. And my wife and I were married for 6 years before we had kids, and I don't even know what happened then, because I've completely lost in my mind. But it was a quieter time, and it was a time where I actually thought, well, sleep is just gonna probably happen, right? For the most part. And then when it didn't happen after our twins came, I realized how different life was without it, right? So a lot of this has to do with our sanity just as much as our kids in general. So I want to start with 2 interesting questions just to pose about how pertinent sleep is to our lives, right? And how important it might be. The first question is, how much sleep should a person get during an average lifetime? Let's use the age expectancy of about 78 to 82 years, depending on if you're male or female. What's the average amount of sleep that we generally should get in our lifetime? Maybe want to pose a guess? Don't be shy. What do you think?
24 years.
You know what? So about 25 years, roughly, is the average amount of time that we're designed to sleep, right, in our lifetime. If you think about that, 25 years, our body doesn't do anything for 25 years unless it's critically important. In fact, many species, many other animals, like when you look at the mammalian species, like I think it's giraffes, other species, hardly sleep at all like we do. But there's something about the human design that says sleep is incredibly important, right? So think about that. 25 years, there's no other activity we will do more in our life than sleep, which of course is kind of a non-activity, it seems like. Second question, which can humans survive without longer? Sleep or food or water?
I guess it's probably sleep.
What's that?
I think it's sleep. That's why we're here.
You think it's sleep? Well, any other guesses? How long can we survive without food in general? It's about roughly 3 to 4 weeks, believe it or not. Human beings can actually survive in general without food. How long can we survive without water? It's 3 days, right? 3 minutes without oxygen, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without without food. But what happens after about 3 days of no sleep? Insanity. I mean, to the point, actually, what happens is that your body, actually, even after two days sometimes of sleep, your body literally starts to shut down. And there's been people who've tried to press, like, how long can you stay up, right? And I think that somebody got to, 5 or 6 days once, which sounds insane, without sleeping. But even during that time, there was what was called micro-sleeps, and the body shuts yourself down. So in essence, what we're here to say is, you can survive way longer without food than you can without sleep. And there's actually been conditions that are fatal that arouse from somebody not sleeping for a long period of time. So sleep is just incredibly important. I think that's one way to look at it. So let's talk about a few milestones, right? We're just going to go through this, and we'll spend a lot of time unless you have questions. When we think of newborns, raise your hand if you have a newborn in the house. Do you have a newborn? There is a lot of sleep that's occurring, right? It's about 16 to 17 hours a day typically a newborn is sleeping. Now, it's all over the place sometimes, but this is the average. And there is a wide variation. Some newborns sleep a lot less, some sleep more, right? But the thing that we want to really remember is that sleep is obviously there because there's so much development happening, right? And that's important to understand, is that that development is often happening during sleep itself. We'll talk later about the growth hormone, some interesting kind of pieces about sleep. By the time they get to 5 months of age, there's about 3 to 4 regular naps that typically are occurring. And again, it depends on kind of the child for the regularity there. But the focus on a newborn age is just generally on health and development, not specific sleep amounts. When we're talking about those youngest kids, we're just wanting them to get sleep so that they begin to progress appropriately. When you get to infancy stage, 2 to 12 months, we're looking at the average recommended sleep is still about 14 to 15 hours. I mean, that's still more than half the day, right? So there's something really important about what's going on here. Towards the middle and the latter half of that first year, sleep becomes more regulated. I don't think many people realize, but about by 4 months, most kids, when you get to about 11 or 12 pounds, can metabolically go through the night without feeding. One of the biggest problems I think that people have, and where they often come to me and we talk about different ways, is let's say I have a 1-year-old who weighs 20 pounds, right? And they're still feeding through the night multiple times. And that's a huge thing. And the good news is, metabolically, these kids can actually last through the night much longer than I think most people realize. Now I say, check with your pediatrician, make sure this is a safe, situation depending on anything condition-wise. But I think most people think they need to feed way more than they need to, and that creates a lot of sleep problems there. So, just kind of consideration. By the time we get to toddlerhood, right, we're looking at 12 months to 3 years at our age range, but the recommended daily sleep is still 12 to 14 hours. Again, we are still at or above half the day should be dedicated to sleep. This is how important this is. And about 15 months of age is typically when they transition from 2 naps to that 1 nap in the afternoon. But this is also the age where a lot of parents have trouble because the movement, the increased mobility, they're talking. I mean, your kid thinks just because they should talk, they should be able to be out of bed and do everything else. It really kind of ramps up at this time. So that's often the challenges we see. And by the preschool age, 3 to 5 or so, again, 11 to 13 hours, look at where we're still hanging here. And remind ourselves that many others in the animal world and don't have this kind of requirement here. So it's still obviously really important. But that increased language, there's a lot of boundary testing. It happens during this preschool years. So when you look at these overall guidelines, I know we're focused on 0 to 3, 0 to 5, but I put these up here because I have a lot of parents who, when we talk about sleep, let's say for their 8-year-old, and I ask them how much sleep they think their 8-year-old should have, they may say 8 hours. But when we're looking at 8-year-olds, we're really talking at 10 to 11 hours is the optimal amount of sleep. And does anyone know who the most sleep-deprived age group on the planet is right now? Mothers. All right, let me define the age cohort. That's true. Yes, mothers, you win. That's one. But if I'm looking at age cohort, what is the most sleep-deprived group on the planet?
6 to 12.
It's teens. It's actually teens. I mean, 6 to 12 has issues. They all have issues, as you see. Teens, it's upwards of 90% of teens estimated today are not getting the recommended amount of sleep. And this is a whole other presentation, but I can tell you one thing. There is tons of research. I could give you 5 factors at a different time that relate to the mental health increased concerns with teens, and all people for that matter, and one is sleep, without a doubt. There's really nobody that probably would dispute that. So, when your teen says, oh, I'm good on 6 hours, they're not good on 6 hours. They're functioning, but they're not really functioning, right? Something we need to remember. The other thing that this is kind of interesting graph, you guys can see this, is that notice if you look at the bottom where it says age of 1, 3, 6, 9 months, and so on. Remember I said there's a wide variability in those first few months? That's what I tell parents, don't worry so much about how much they're getting. Let's just look at the routines you're starting to put into place. But by the time you get to 10 years, look at how the amount of sleep comes together, right? There's not as much variability when you get to that age. So again, we don't expect that my 10-year-old, right, should be definitely sleeping more than 8 hours, 7 hours a night. If they're not, then that's probably going to, connect into other concerns, one of which may be increased anxiety. We all know that anxiety is really, I think, for many ways kind of running rampant with our younger kids today, and it seems that anxiety and sleep have a really close relationship there. So that's one of the first things when I screen for anxiety concerns in my office, or I screen for attention concerns, I always screen for sleep, because ADHD kids look a lot like chronically sleep-deprived kids when you look at the research. So we've got to be careful to screen for them. The other thing I put this up, okay, so I'm going to try to take you through this, make sense on this. These are the stages of sleep, and I know it might be a little hard to see. You see at the bottom, the horizontal axis where it goes 1, 2, 3. Think of the 1 as being the first hour of the night, second hour of the night, third hour. And then on the vertical axis, you see how it says awake, REM, and 1, 2, 3, 4. The big thing to point out here is that look at the very top graph, and that's the graph for kids. Do you notice how in hour 1 especially, what stage of sleep are they going down to? You guys see that? What stage of sleep are they getting into there? The line goes all the way down to stage 3 and 4, right? So I want to point this out because by the time you get to be a young adult, how much stage 3 and 4 sleep do you have in the first couple hours? Not very much, right? And I hate to tell you this, but by the time you get into 65 plus, how much what we call deep sleep, stage 3 and 4 is the really deep sleep. How much deep sleep do you have by the time you get to 65? Not hardly any at all, right? The reason this is really important, one, it relates to actually physical development. A lot of the ways that kids, when they're younger, they repair their body is through some of this deep level, right, slow wave delta sleep. The other thing is that it also relates to complaints of nightmares versus night terrors, right? And we're going to talk about this later, but it's probably a good time to get into this. Raise your hand if you think you know the difference between a night terror and a nightmare. Okay, so this is kind of important to know. Night terrors typically happen at the beginning of the night. So you lay your kid down, and in the first 2 or 3 hours, they have this really strong emotional reaction, right? The reason it typically happens at the beginning of the night is because night terrors are connected to slow wave sleep. They're connected to that deep stage 3 and 4 sleep. And so many times parents are like, yeah, I laid them down, an hour later they were just hysterical. But the thing with night terrors is, when you try to comfort them, what happens? Are they aware of you or not? They're not, right? Let's say you try to console them or you try to give them a hug. Remember, they're actually still asleep. So with night terrors, they seem inconsolable. And the more you try to console and do things with them, the more they might actually get upset. So what we tell parents with a night terror is just make sure that the environment they're in is safe. They're not going to fall down the stairs. They're not going to do something to seriously hurt themselves. But allow them kind of to have their space. Because by the time the whole night is over, will kids remember night terrors? They don't remember them, right? There's no recollection. They're in deep sleep. They don't have any recollection of what happens. On the flip side, nightmares, whereas REM is the black bars, where's that occurring mainly in kids? Early in the night or later in the morning? Later in the morning, you see those bars there? So nightmares typically happen during REM sleep. And nightmares, kids do wake up and they are aware of like the bad dream that they had. And as parents, we can kind of help console them in general. But it's really important, and raise your hand if you've experienced nightmares or night terrors in your kids at all. Yeah, and it can be a really disconcerting thing, right? It can be a really difficult situation to deal with. But when you start to kind of understand like when they occur and how, like what they look like, it's much better. Because nightmares, you might be able to talk your kid through a little bit. Night terrors is a very different story. So, does that make sense? Or questions about that piece? Okay. So, why are we so focused on sleep? Why is it so important? Well, one is that the prevalence of sleep difficulties during childhood is really high. And a lot of adolescents have significant sleep complaints, right? 40 have significant sleep complaints. 80 or 90 aren't even getting enough sleep, right? There's a lot going on there. But sleep problems have also increased significantly over the past 30 years. Why do we think that's the case? Technology, what do you think is going on?
Cell phone use in bed.
What percent of your teens today sleep with their cell phone on or next to their bed? What?
90.
About 85%, 85 to 90%. So you can imagine that even if they're not getting calls, simply the presence of that device there is an activating agent, right, neurologically for the brain in that way. It's interesting, they've looked at studies, they estimate that we are sleeping 20% less now than we did at the beginning of the 1900s. So again, what are we losing? There's probably a lot that we're losing there. But you know what's interesting is, despite all the changes with sleep, there's not a lot of screening that's done like within the pediatric office. There was a survey that indicated that 20 to 40% of pediatricians and family physicians did not screen for sleep at a well child visit, right? And that's amazing to me. I mean, it's such a critical thing, but it's also one of the things why, like any of you, raise your hand if you're a first step therapist or a therapist with younger kids. So it's one of the reasons, like I talk to therapists about, just if you have a 30-second conversation, you might be the only one who asks about sleep in those first few years. And the differences you can make in the first few years are so much probably greater than the changes that you make as kids get older, right? So that's why it's just really important in that way. The other reason is, beyond the concerns, sleep issues are actually really changeable. They're amenable to change if we get to them, especially earlier. We mentioned it's a common complaint for kids and adolescents, but sleep issues often have a chronic course, right? Years and years ago when I was in St. Louis, I had, and practicing there, I had this father who came to me and was having a lot of issues with his adolescent son. He had been divorced. He was about 60 pounds overweight. And he was trying to convince me that he existed just fine on 4 hours of sleep a night. He had no problems at all. The reality is, I challenge to say he didn't exist well at all. It really had been a huge factor in the concerns that we saw. So they have such a chronic course, and if significant sleep issues occur early in life and they're not addressed, there's a great chance that they're going to occur later in life too. And it affects almost every medical or psychological condition, right? If you're not sleeping well, it kind of impacts in that way. So questions? Just questions about anything there? Anything that you could have experienced or thoughts? Okay. So let's talk a little bit about sleep and health. And I think this is kind of a fascinating thing to consider. Sleep is really connected to our metabolism. I was just mentioning to a couple people earlier before this started, there's been some research that have looked at groups who go on diets, different types of diets. And they have basically, when you look at two groups on the same diet, they vary one single factor that seems to affect like weight loss. And that factor, in these studies they've looked at it, is the time that these individuals go to bed. So if you're all on the same exact diet, and one of you is going to bed in a half an hour, hour earlier, based on getting better sleep, there's probably a good chance that you in that group are going to lose more weight than if you're going to bed later. So we know there's a heavy tie-in. We also know that with kids especially, the growth hormone is really regulated by sleep. So kids who are chronically sleep deprived it's disrupting the growth hormone. And it really seems to be related to, we know they have this issue